Get ready for that football show with those fantasy guys.
Hello and welcome to week number 6 of That Football Show with those fantasy guys.
And live before you steaming eyes, we're those fantasy guys.
We certainly are. Let's not waste a single second. Let's get right into it, Jay. Hashtag trending. What do you have for a week 6 edition?
Well, Rick, I can tell you right now, I'm a little bittersweet this week. I'm feeling a little bittersweet. In the Border Beer League, I'm in first place. That is my go-to number 1 league. In your PBFFL league, I'm in fact undefeated. But last night, I had a crushing defeat. I lost my coast-to-coast Madden Super Bowl to Irish Jedi 27. Shout out to Irish Jedi 27 on a great season. See you in the Super Bowl next year. Respect.
This is fantasy football, not Madden football.
But Madden is relevant to fantasy, as I've pointed out on a number of occasions this year.
Save it for your next show. Let's move on to hashtag trending. Jay, once again, what do you have for a week 1 edition or week 6 edition of hashtag trending?
Return of the King. TB12 is back and didn't miss a beat. Unbelievable results. I think some people might have been a little bit hesitant. I, in fact, have him on a roster, and I didn't start him because I was worried about a little bit of rust.
Shame.
For shame.
Shame.
That's okay. I am an undefeated in that league, and I got undefeated without Tom Brady, and I did it for a large part without Le'Veon Bell. So watch out, league, because I'm coming.
All right. With that said, let's move on to key injuries. Jay, few less key injuries this week. We've only added the new ones, but some significant names on the list, as you're about to see. We have Eddie Lacy, Jeremy Hill, Stephon Diggs, Steve Smith, and Sammy Coates all popping up on the injury list. Again, from this point forward, we're not going to return last week's injuries. We're only going to add the new guys because it was just getting too much to manage on the screen.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that Eddie Lacy is on there because our question last week, our Facebook question, was in reference to Eddie Lacy, and we told you not to trade for Eddie Lacy. So I hope Keith Bradley did not do so.
I would hope for Keith's sake he did not.
Stay here, Keith, if you need any more fantasy advice.
That's exactly where I was going, but if he did, he's in luck because this is the beginning of the show, and we have a whole half hour, 20 minutes of fantastic fantasy football advice coming your way, starting now with the Hunt for Red October.
Finding the ultimate sub.
Fantastic, Jay. Why don't you tell our viewers who is on a bye this week and who that affects in fantasy relevance?
Well, the Vikings and the Buccaneers are on a bye. That affects me because I'm a big Bucs fan. After the tremendous Monday night victory, we get a week off to celebrate and bathe in our glory. And then the Vikings, who out of nowhere are the only undefeated team in the NFL. So players that are going to affect, obviously, Jameis Winston, who is a borderline, if you're in a single quarterback type of league, he might be a 8, 9, 10 starter. Mike Evans, who, as you mentioned off air, is producing and just becoming an elite receiver before our eyes. Your boyfriend, Stephon Diggs. And the Vikings D, probably the number 1 D up there with the Broncos right now in fantasy. So these are the type of players you're going to be trying to replace this week with the Hunt for Red October.
And fantastic. Why don't you tell us what you did last week for the Hunt for Red October?
Absolutely. Last week, I went on a limb. I said that the Raiders were going to score some points against the choke artist Chargers. That's exactly what I said last week. Now, 2 things to talk about. The Raiders did get a win, and the Chargers did prove to be choke artists. So I guess I was right.
I don't know if that's exactly how the segment works, but that's okay because I definitely was right. I hit the nail on the head when I told you to start Brian Hoyer. Last week, Brian Hoyer was 33 of 43 for 297 yards and 2 touchdowns. Still only owned in 28% of leagues. If you need quarterback help, you must go out and add Brian Hoyer because he has got a lock on that job in Chicago, and he is not giving it back. He is playing phenomenal football right now. Jay, tell us this week, who you're starting in the segment for Hunt for Red October, finding the ultimate sub.
This week, I got Marcus Mariota versus the Browns. The Browns, as I say frequently on this episode and this segment, are a train wreck. So I like to find teams that are a train wreck and start somebody against those teams.
Proverbial tire fire.
The Titans have established a little something going on, a little resurgence of DeMarco Murray. It looks like the only thing that can make DeMarco Murray fantasy irrelevant is Chip Kelly. But I digress because DeMarco Murray is obviously being started. But this week you should also start Marcus Mariota. He is going to put up points against the Browns. The Browns might even put up points for him. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree 100%. Marcus Mariota is a great start this week. I went with a wide receiver this week. I've been kind of riding the quarterbacks in and out of this segment, and I wanted to branch out, if you will. If you take a look at the New Orleans Saints and their leading wide receivers, Brandon Cooks has played in 83% of games. He's got 14 targets and 5 receptions. Then you can move on to their second wide receiver, Willie Snead, had missed week 2, but in week 3 he played. In week 4 he played just 67% of snaps and only saw 1 target. What does that leave, Jay? Well, that leaves a tight end who just can't seem to get on the same page with Drew Brees, with the exception of a single week. And that leaves a guy named Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas is a rookie. He's big. He's fast. But more importantly, he's on the field for 83% of their snaps. And in those 83% of snaps, over the last 2 weeks, he's had 20 targets, 11 receptions, and 6 of those targets have come in the red zone. Jay, on a team that likes to pass the ball and likes to throw it to a big wide receiver, he's the biggest, the fastest, and the most consistent of them all, and you can probably still go out and add him. So if you can, go out and get Michael Thomas. They're playing at home this week against the Carolina Panthers, who we used to be weary of, but they seem to have been exposed in that secondary, and I think Drew Brees is going to take full advantage.
I like all the numbers that you put out there, and I couldn't agree with you more. Actually, when I was doing my research for the segment, though I didn't have many numbers, I had more of a gut feeling than you.
It's based on Madden?
I had a brief. No, actually, I've never used Mike Thomas on Madden, so I don't have any. But anyways,
okay.
I thought about pulling this guy out for this exact segment, but so I'm behind you 100% on this.
Fantastic. Let's move on to tough sits.
Sit down, Waldo.
So last week, my tough sit, I went straight at, coming off a 500-yard, 3-touchdown game. I went straight at Matty Ice. I said, you better watch out for this matchup. And yeah, I'll give you the fact that the Atlanta Falcons pulled out the win in Denver. Not an easy thing to do. But his numbers were 15 to 28 for 267 yards and 1 touchdown. So if you did defy me and play Matty Ice, you probably got the loss.
Yeah, and 150 of those yards went to his running back on swing plays, which is not what you're looking for from a fantasy quarterback, although it did work out for them. Last week, I told you to sit down Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford was 19 of 25 for 118 yards, and I said last week that Matt Stafford would not throw a touchdown in this game. I misspoke. What I meant to say is Matt Stafford would not throw a touchdown after the first quarter, in which he threw 3. So after having a stellar record on this program and during this segment, I feel that I bought a little leeway, and hopefully that you can forgive me. Matt Stafford looked poised. He looked as if he knew exactly how the Eagles were going to line up against him, and he just picked them apart in the first quarter. And I think he had almost all those yards and all 3 touchdowns in the first quarter.
Yeah, I know you had a trade offer for Matt Stafford. I don't know if this game swings your decision at all.
It does not. No,
okay.
It does not help at all. I think it was more preparation, and I think it was a lack of preparation on the part of the Eagles, who I think will rebound this week in a big way.
I hope so, because based on a lot of your again, numbers that you like to throw out at me. I went out and picked up the Eagles defense when they were on a bye week, and they definitely let me down this week. So that's why I go with my gut.
On the show, we never discussed starting the Eagles defense. We discussed sitting Matt Stafford.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to this week, Jay. How do you follow up that award-winning performance?
This week, again, it's like this show is cyclical. I'm going to talk about a person that we discussed on a Facebook question last week, and we said you don't make this trade because of this top 5 running back. I'm talking about Carlos Hyde. This is a TFS alert. West Coast team playing on the East Coast at 1 o'clock, plus the distraction of the return of Colin Kaepernick, and the 49ers are in fact horrible as those black uniforms. Stay away from the former Buckeye and sit Carlos Hyde this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think that with the Kaepernick coming back, I think he's going to take probably half of Carlos Hyde's carries away from him.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're going to be running that quarterback.
And it's just a huge, what is the thing that NFL coaches hate the most? Distraction. Yeah. And this week I can't even imagine what's going on in San Francisco. The distraction that him being named the starter is causing in that locker room. They're all answering questions about it. So I just stay away from the 49ers in general. He's the only guy worth even considering, and I'd sit him.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to wait a week and see what happens with Kaepernick. He might come out and retake that amazing form he had early in his career, but he might not. This week I'm going with Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck is just 3 of 9 over his last 12 starts, and wins don't matter in fantasy football, but they do matter when it comes down to stats. Over the last 3 weeks, now get ready because here comes some more of those numbers that you like. Andrew Luck has 889 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. Now, while those numbers sound good in fantasy football, the reality is that Brian Hoyer, Blake Bortles, Dak Prescott, and Kirk Cousins have all scored more fantasy points than Andrew Luck over the last 3 weeks. Not only that, but he is playing a Texans defense that is allowing, are you ready? More numbers. 181 yards passing and 3 touchdowns over 6 weeks. Andrew Luck is looking harassed in the pocket. The Colts defense is atrocious, and the Texans want to run the ball, play small ball, and win that way, at least right now in the season. That's foreshadowing for a later segment. And I think that they're going to be able to run the ball efficiently on Indianapolis, keep Andrew Luck off the field. He's still going to get his numbers. He's going to have 250 yards and a touchdown, probably a pick. But he's not going to be the Andrew Luck that you drafted hoping he was going to be the stud.
Well, let me tell you what. I got a couple of things. We've discussed Andrew Luck for a couple of weeks in a row. We had a Facebook question. Then last week he was my weekly buy. The Colts suck. Ride Andrew Luck. They will be behind in this game, and Andrew Luck is going to have to make a play, and he's probably going to make 3 plays. That's it.
Well, I hope for your sake he does, but let's remember, this is a defense that has yet to allow a 300-yard passer and has not surrendered more than 2 passing touchdowns in a single game in 6 weeks of football. I think that, anytime that you can't trust your gut, look at the numbers, and you can trust the numbers. The numbers don't lie.
The numbers do not lie.
So let's move on to Wall Street, speaking of numbers. And these are players that you can buy low or sell high. Jay, who do you have for us this week? And let me say before we get started that we had a little bit worked into the segment. We didn't have time for it this week, if you can believe that. But we kind of was reviewing the players that we talked about. And just off the top of my head, players that I told you to buy low on, Cameron Sardis-Payne, Jacquez Rogers, and I know you had a couple.
Yeah, I had
greatest
Sammy
hits that you had
Coates,
in there.
and then I also had
a sell high on Matt Forte. So this is a segment that I think you as a viewer, you really want to pay attention to because we really kill it on this one.
Awesome.
That being said,
I'm going to go ahead and say my buy low this week, Cameron Meredith, wide receiver, Chicago Bears. 9 catches on 12 targets, 120 yards and a TD. To me, my gut tells me that Brian Hoyer and Meredith formed kind of a little bond while they were practicing.
It would appear that way.
When all the actual starters were out there playing before the injuries, and now that Hoyer and Meredith are on the field together, that connection has translated. And yes, Alshon Jeffrey's a stud, and yes, Kevin White's a talent. But the connection that he has with Hoyer is he trusts him, he knows where he's going to be, and he's going to that player. He's the one he knows. Jay Cutler has a connection with Alshon Jeffries, not Brian Hoyer. So I think Meredith is going to be a guy that you can get low now. You better get him low now, too. He had a good week. He's probably a hot commodity, but you want to get him now because the next 2-3 weeks, I think he's going to be a solid flex that you're going to be able to ride. And if Hoyer keeps a starting position, I think he's going to be a solid flex play as we're getting into week 10, 11, 12 in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And the other thing to mention here is that Alshon Jeffrey is clearly not Alshon Jeffrey. Something is going on there. We know he's dealing with a lot of nicks and bruises and things like that don't prevent him from playing, but prevent him from playing well. Now, what Cameron Meredith is doing for Alshon Jeffrey, other than stealing all of his fantasy points, is he's drawing attention away from him. So Alshon Jeffrey might also be a guy, if you have any faith in Brian Hoyer, that you could look to add low right now, because as the coverage starts to roll to Cameron Meredith and Alshon Jeffrey starts seeing those one-on-ones again, we know that Alshon Jeffrey at 90% can beat 80% of the one-on-ones in the NFL. That was a whole bunch of numbers for you.
Oh, you love the numbers.
I love the numbers. Now, speaking of numbers, and we were just talking about the Texans, I've got a buy low here that sounds a little interesting at first, and then you might get a little scared, and then it gets interesting again, and I'll explain. So the buy low is Brock Osweiler. Now, coming into the season, people were all high on Brock Osweiler. They thought he was going to be a great quarterback. He's got great weapons down there. He's got a great coaching staff and a great defense to complement. He's come out and he hasn't really played all that well, but he hasn't played awful either. Now, if we have a graphic that we made up before the show, and I was hoping we could pull that up. If you look at the left side of this graphic, you're looking at the games that he's played. Now, he's played Chicago, Kansas City, New England, Tennessee, and Minnesota. The only team in there with a bad defense that he's played is Chicago, and he scored 20 fantasy points on it. Now, what I'm talking about for this segment in particular is if you look to the right, to that big schedule, what's left for Brock Osweiler.
I see so many numbers.
There are so many numbers, and we're going to talk about them all. So if you look to the right, starting in week number 6, he plays the Indianapolis Colts, and you'll see all the way over on the right, you'll see the defensive rank. Now, with the exception of week 7, where he plays Denver, and week 9, where he has a bye week, look at the rest of those matchups. Indy, Detroit, Jacksonville, Oakland, San Diego, Green Bay, Indianapolis, and Jacksonville, Cincinnati in the Super Bowl or championship game in your fantasy league. If you look at those rankings for those defenses, there is not a single team rated defense, meaning that all of these defenses are either 20th or worse in passing in the NFL. Brock Osweiler is set up. I'm not saying he's definitely going to, but he is set up to have a fantastic statistical finish to this season. And I think that with Lamar Miller pottling away at 2.5 to 3 yards a carry, they're going to have to start throwing the ball more. And with these type of matchups right here, right there, those ones right there, those are them. Those are matchups that can win you a fantasy championship if you're struggling at quarterback. And this is a guy that you need to go out and add because he's only owned in 30% of leagues right now.
I agree 100%. The way you form your argument, I think every skill player on the Texans is someone you could go out and get.
And I agree with that too. I think that right now is a good buy low opportunity for all of those skill players. Lamar Miller probably has more value than the others, but DeAndre Hopkins hasn't been doing fantastic. He's been having good weeks.
So what I'm thinking is that you might be able to, obviously this segment we're talking about buy low. You have to finagle a trade to get DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, right.
But you might be able to get him at a much lower
Absolutely,
value
right now
than he's going to have in week 15,
well,
14, 15, 16.
Starting this week
Right.
because they play the Indianapolis Colts this week.
But then again, just something to consider. You might want to wait until they play the Broncos.
The Broncos, right.
And then
the problem is, though, is that he might have a resurged amount of confidence in his owner might have a resurged amount of confidence after this week because I think he has a big game this week.
What we're saying is this is a great pick. Brock Osweiler, all the Denvers. But, if you can't do it this week before they play the Colts, wait a week and maybe try again after they play the Broncos.
Yeah, and the other nice thing is if we could see the graphic one more time, is that when they do play the Denver Broncos in week number 7, just 2 weeks later, they got a bye week that owner's going to have to contend with.
Yep.
So that might be another good opportunity. Listen, he had a down week. I know he's got a good matchup next week, but then he's on a bye. I can give you a guy who's already had his bye, and you don't have to worry about it. Anyway, add Osweiler, and if you can, pick up some other skill players for the Texans, because that schedule down the stretch has got to be the best in the NFL.
I like it. I like it a lot.
All right, let's move on to the Facebook question. Jay, I am going to read this one to you. I was offered Aaron Rodgers and Travis Benjamin for Antonio Brown. What do you think? 2 studs in there and a guy who's gone off a couple times this season.
There are 2 studs in there. I know Antonio Brown went off the board rounds before Aaron Rodgers in a standard redraft league. Travis Benjamin had 0 value at the draft, but obviously with the injuries, he has value. He's the number 1 receiver there. I would do this trade. I would take Aaron Rodgers and Travis Benjamin for Antonio Brown. I think my rationale is there are more Antonio Browns in the NFL with your Dezes, your Odell Beckhams, your Julio Joneses, your DeAndre Hopkins. There's more Antonio Brown level receivers in the NFL than there are Aaron Rodgers levels quarterback. There's 3, maybe 4. So I'd go ahead and make this trade.
You would pull the trigger. Yep. Fantastic. Let's move on to weekly leagues, Jay. A big week for you last week. See if you can follow it up this week. What do you got?
Well, this is a player that we have mentioned a number of times this year on TFS.
And when did we mention him? Just
weeks ago. Week 2, week 3. I was telling you this is a buy low candidate. I was telling you this is a weekly or a sneaky start guy. I was telling you that this is the guy. If I can remember, I said he was the guy with the size and the speed and the opportunity that you want to get. If you didn't get him when I told you weeks ago, it's probably too late now, but you can probably get him in a weekly league. Sammy Coates. He is a stud. I told you about him weeks ago, and nothing has changed except his production. He is going through the roof. I told you
he could have had 4 last week.
I told you he was the big play receiver on the Steelers. He has done nothing but prove me right. Play him this week because he doesn't have a huge volume. He just has big plays. But because he doesn't have the huge volume, he doesn't have the huge price tag in weekly league. So he is a guy you can base your weekly league around him with big points on few big plays.
I love the pick, mostly because we talked about him a couple weeks ago before he went off, which is something we pride ourselves here at TFS. Now, if you're new to viewing the program and you have a Facebook page, please go to Facebook, look us up, search That Football Show, and look for The Shield. We are at the halfway point right now, week 6. We only go 12 weeks in this football program. Now, fantasy football goes 16, 15 weeks, sometimes 17. The reason why we cut it off at 12 is because that's right around Thanksgiving, and number 1, we're burnt out, because this is a lot of work, believe it or not. And number 2 is because we feel that at that point, we've delivered you to the fantasy playoffs, and it's on you to bring it home. So, Jay, with that, that is all the time we have for week 6, unless you have something to add.
I do have one. I mean, we pride ourselves in getting you to the playoffs. Then it's your job to take it from there. My question is, who's getting you to the playoffs?
Brock Osweiler. That's who. If you watch the show, you'll know Brock Osweiler is going to bring it home for your fantasy team. That's all the time we have for this week of TFS. We'll see you next week on That Football Show with those fantasy guys.
And we are those fantasy guys. Good luck next week. Shout out to Irish Jedi 27. Congratulations.
Nobody cares about Madden. We'll see you next week, everybody.